Welcome to the deep dive. You sent in an article that has paleontologists talking, a ton of new Pterodactylus fossils. Sounds kind of like a Jurassic family reunion.
Yeah.
And we are going to dive into this research with our expert and find out why everyone is so excited.
Well, you don't get to rewrite what we know about these iconic creatures every day.
No.
What's amazing is that this isn't about finding new fossils in some remote dig site. It was using new techniques to look at fossils that are already in museums.
Yeah.
And that's changed everything about how we understand Pterodactylus.
Okay, so the article talked about using UV light to examine the fossils.
Right.
Sounds kind of sci-fi, honestly.
It is.
Can you explain how that works and what they found?
Well, it's surprisingly simple, but really effective. So certain materials in fossils, like the bones, they glow under UV light.
Oh, cool.
Scientists call this fluorescence.
Okay.
It's like shining a black light on a poster and then all these hidden details jump out at you.
Yeah.
So in this case, the UV light showed these subtle skeletal differences that you couldn't see with normal light. And this let researchers tell Pterodactylus apart from other pterosaurs that look really similar.
So are you saying they found a bunch of Pterodactylus fossils in museums that were misidentified?
Yeah. Like literally just hanging out in museum drawers.
That's wild.
Right. And so these fossils have been in collections for who knows how long, some of them labeled wrong. And then someone gets this new technique, shines a different light on them, and boom, a whole new understanding.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
The article says they identified over 40 new Pterodactylus specimens using this technique.
Right.
So that brings the total to almost 50.
Uh-huh.
That's a huge jump, right? Like, what does that mean for our understanding of this species?
Oh, it's huge, a total game changer. It's like before. We were looking at Pterodactylus with only part of the picture. We knew only a little because there were so few fossils. But now, with 50 specimens, including different ages and sizes, we can really get a full picture of their lives, how they grew, and how they evolved.
Okay, so speaking of ages and sizes, they were finding everything from these tiny, they call them flaplings, I love that term,
It's a cute term.
to full-grown adults.
Yeah.
It sounds like we are looking at an entire Pterodactylus community.
Yeah.
Can you, paint us a picture of what a Pterodactylus family might have looked like back in the Jurassic?
Oh, yeah. So picture this. You're on this rocky cliff face, looking out over this big tropical sea. You have all these tiny robin-sized hatchlings flapping their wings, learning to fly. And these flaplings, unlike birds, they could fly almost right after hatching.
Oh, wow.
They were precocial.
Precocial.
It means they're born pretty much ready to move.
So not like baby birds in a nest at all.
Totally different.
That's cool.
So we've got these flaplings, and then you have the teenagers, maybe the size of pigeons, practicing flying, chasing bugs, learning to hunt. And then you have the adults with their big meter-long wingspans, soaring over everything, scanning the water for fish. They must have been a sight to see.
Wow, I want to see that Jurassic National Geographic special now.
It'd be amazing.
So the article also talked about some of the fossils having soft tissues preserved. What can we learn from that?
Ah, soft tissues. That's the dream, right?
Yeah.
Because usually it's just the bones that fossilize. But sometimes you get lucky, and things like skin, muscles, even organs leave an impression in the rock.
So like a glimpse at the actual living animal.
Exactly. And it's really rare to get that kind of detail, which makes these Pterodactylus specimens even more amazing. And what they showed is astounding. We can see details of the head crest, which might have been for display, maybe attracting mates or scaring rivals. And we can even see webbing between their toes.
Webbing.
Yeah.
So they could swim. I thought Pterodactylus were all about flying.
This is where those soft tissues really help us understand these animals. They show us things like the webbing on their feet, which, together with those long, slender wings, suggest that Pterodactylus might have been as happy in the water as in the air. Imagine them diving into the Jurassic seas, catching fish, and then taking off with these powerful wing strokes.
Wow, that's not how I pictured Pterodactylus at all, but I guess it makes sense with where they lived.
Yeah, and this is just the beginning. From studying these soft tissue impressions, we can learn about their aerodynamics, how they flew, even how they regulated their temperature. It's like a high-definition snapshot of life in the Jurassic.
So new fossils, UV light showing hidden stuff, soft tissues painting a clear picture. This one study has totally changed what we know about Pterodactylus.
Really has.
And one of the biggest things they found is how this research has changed how we classify pterosaurs. For years, paleontologists have been trying to classify them based on these little differences in their skeletons, and it's been really hard. But this study shows that those differences can be misleading, especially when you consider the differences between individuals of different ages and sexes.
Definitely.
So how did they figure out which fossils were actually Pterodactylus, Phil?
Well, they looked at a specific set of features in the skull, hips, hands, and feet of Pterodactylus. These are unique characteristics that set them apart from other pterosaurs. And using the UV light, they were able to see those same features in tons of other specimens,
Cool.
even some that had been classified as completely different species.
Wow, so it's like they had this Pterodactylus identification cheat sheet, and they used it to solve this prehistoric mystery.
Exactly. It shows how this new approach of combining anatomical analysis with technology has totally revolutionized how we study and classify these fascinating animals.
It makes you wonder what other mysteries are hidden in museums around the world, just waiting for the right technology or the right set of eyes to find them. But before we get carried away, let's go back to those flaplings for a minute. The article made them sound super interesting. What's so important about finding such young Pterodactylus specimens?
Finding those flaplings was amazing. It showed for sure that Pterodactylus were precocial, meaning they could fly from a very early age.
We talked about precocial, meaning they were born ready to move, but why is that different from birds? Isn't flying just flying?
Not really. Birds, even though they are incredible flyers, they take a while to grow their flight feathers and muscles. It takes time for them to be able to fly. But Pterodactylus, it seems, they had a different strategy. Being able to fly right away probably helped them survive. They could get away from predators easier, find food, and maybe even start practicing their fishing skills early on.
It's amazing to think about these little creatures flying around millions of years ago, dodging dinosaurs, perfecting their flying.
Yeah,
It really helps us see Pterodactylus as a species, doesn't it?
totally. And that's what makes this discovery so groundbreaking. It's not just adding more fossils to a collection. It's about filling in the gaps and making these ancient creatures come alive in a way we never thought possible.
And it all started with shining a UV light on some old bones. It just goes to show, even in a field like paleontology, where we think we know a lot, there are always new discoveries.
Exactly. And that's what makes science so cool. It's never-ending quest for knowledge. And even the things we think are familiar can still have amazing secrets.
Okay, I have one last question that's been bugging me. The article said the first Pterodactylus fossil was found almost 250 years ago. Why did it take so long to find all these other relatives? Were they hiding right in front of us?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Part of it is that paleontology is always changing. New technologies like the UV light in this study let us see fossils in a whole new way, literally. But there's also an element of luck in scientific discovery. Sometimes it takes the right researcher asking the right questions at the right time to find the secrets in a fossil collection.
So, a little bit of luck and a lot of scientific know-how.
Yeah. But it's important to remember that paleontology isn't just digging up bones.
Right.
It's about studying them carefully, comparing them, and constantly rethinking what we know. In this case, it took researchers who were willing to look at familiar fossils with new eyes, using new tools, and being curious. And that's how they made this amazing discovery.
So it wasn't just the technology, it was their willingness to question what they thought they knew and see things in a new way.
Exactly. And that's a good lesson for anyone, no matter what they do. Sometimes the biggest discoveries are made by looking again at what we think we already know with a new perspective and asking new questions.
It's a good reminder that there's always more to learn and that the past is full of surprises. But I think we've talked about a lot already in this first part of our deep dive.
We have.
Let's take a moment to let all this sink in, and then we'll come back and explore some more of this research.
Sounds good. There's still so much more to learn about these amazing creatures.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been exploring this remarkable discovery in paleontology, a whole new understanding of the iconic Pterodactylus, all thanks to innovative research and, of course, UV light. Before we left off, we were talking about those incredible flaplings, their precocial nature, and how this study has actually changed how we classify pterosaurs. Ready to go a bit deeper?
Absolutely. There's so much more to uncover about Pterodactylus and its world back in the Jurassic.
Okay, so let's pick up where we left off. You mentioned that this research has helped clarify how we classify other pterosaurs found in the same area of Bavaria. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. The Solnhofen limestone in Bavaria, Germany is this amazing place for fossils from the late Jurassic period. It's incredibly well preserved. It's like a snapshot of a lost world with pterosaurs, fish, early birds, even insects, all preserved perfectly.
So not just a pterodactylus party, a whole ecosystem we're talking about.
Right. And for a long time, classifying all those pterosaur fossils was a real challenge. Little differences in bone structure made it hard to tell which species were actually different and how they were related.
I see.
But with this new research on Pterodactylus, it kind of started a domino effect.
Oh, interesting. What do you mean by domino effect?
Well, by figuring out the exact unique features of Pterodactylus, thanks to the AREV Light researchers, could go back and look at other pterosaur fossils from the same place.
Okay.
They could compare them to the Pterodactylus blueprint and see if they really matched.
So they basically had this Pterodactylus ID kit, and they went through a whole pile of pterosaur bones.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And what they found was that some fossils that people thought were different species were actually just variations of Pterodactylus.
Yeah.
They saw small differences in size, crest shape, and proportions that might have been because of age, sex, or just individual differences, not different species.
That makes sense, like realizing that two dogs that look really different might just be different breeds of the same species, not entirely different species.
Exactly. And this has really helped us understand how to classify pterosaurs from Solnhofen. It gives us a clearer picture of how diverse they were and how they were related.
So it wasn't just about Pterodactylus. This research affected how we think about a whole bunch of pterosaurs.
Precisely. It shows how interconnected everything is in paleontology. Every discovery can change how we understand not just one species, but entire ecosystems and how things evolved. And it also shows that we need to keep looking at our classifications as we get new evidence.
This is all super fascinating. You know, when we started talking about this research, I have to admit, I was a little skeptical about the UV light thing. It sounded kind of gimmicky to me.
I get it.
But you've definitely convinced me that it's a powerful tool for paleontologists.
Yeah, it sounds a bit like something out of a crime show, doesn't it? But it shows how technology can change even the oldest scientific fields.
Right. It's amazing how shining a different kind of light on a fossil can show us so much.
Absolutely. And this UV fluorescence technique, it's not just for pterosaurs either. It's being used to study all sorts of fossils, from dinosaurs to plants. Who knows what else we might find?
Mind-blowing to think about all the things we might discover, just waiting for the right technology or the right person to find them. But speaking of researchers, one thing that really struck me about this study was how much detail they got from these fossils.
Yeah.
It's like they were able to figure out so much about the lives of these Pterodactylus.
It's truly remarkable. By combining the traditional anatomical studies with the soft tissue stuff and the UV light analysis, they've given us a really detailed picture of Pterodactylus. We know much more about how they grew, how they flew, even hints about their social behavior.
It's almost like we can imagine what it was like to be a Pterodactylus soaring over the Jurassic landscape.
That's what we're always aiming for, right?
Yeah.
To take these pieces of bone and rock and imagine them as living, breathing animals again, to see them walking, swimming, flying, just like they did millions of years ago.
Like solving a giant prehistoric puzzle, with each new fossil giving us another piece.
Exactly.
And I think this research has given us some really important pieces of the Pterodactylus puzzle.
It definitely has. And it reminds us that we always have more to learn, even about creatures we thought we knew well. Every fossil has a story. And with every discovery, we're getting closer to understanding all the different forms of life that have existed on Earth.
Beautifully put. But before we get too philosophical, I have another question that's been bugging me. The article mentioned that Pterodactylus was kind of overlooked in popular culture because of those giant pterosaurs. You know, the ones with huge wingspans that could probably pick up a car?
Ah, yes. Like Quetzalcoatlus and Hatzegopteryx, the real giants of the pterosaur world. It's easy to see why they get all the attention.
Exactly. It's hard to compete with something that big. But with all these new things we're learning about Pterodactylus, do you think it has a chance to become popular again?
I think it deserves to. It may not have been the biggest or scariest pterosaur, but Pterodactylus is important. It was the first one ever discovered back in the late 1700s, and it helped us understand these amazing creatures in the first place. And these new discoveries make it even more significant.
Like the original pterosaur is making a comeback.
I like that. That's exactly what this research is about, taking another look at something familiar and finding out there's still so much more to learn. And I think it can inspire a whole new generation to get excited about paleontology and pterosaurs.
Speaking of inspiration, this research really shows how important collaboration is in science. It wasn't just one person or one technique that led to these discoveries. It was a whole team, using both old and new methods.
Definitely. Science is rarely a one-person show. It works best when people share ideas and knowledge. This research is a great example of how experts from different fields can work together and get incredible results. We had paleontologists, geologists, people who specialize in imaging, even engineers, all working together to understand these ancient creatures.
It reminds us that science is a team effort and that the biggest discoveries often happen when different fields come together. And I think that's a perfect spot to pause for a moment. We've covered a lot, from how technology and perspective are important in science to how important collaboration is in research. But there's one more fascinating part of this discovery that I want to talk about, and that's how it affects our understanding of the evolution of flight.
I'm looking forward to that as well. The evolution of flight is such a captivating topic, and Pterodactylus is a major player in that story.
So let's take a short break to gather our thoughts, and then we'll come back and explore the final layer of this incredible discovery. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're wrapping up our look at the amazing Pterodactylus discoveries and thinking about what they tell us about these ancient creatures that could fly. Before the break, we were talking about how this research shows how important it is for scientists from different areas to work together and how they are all helping us understand these fascinating animals even better.
Yeah, it really shows how powerful it can be when researchers from different fields work together. Each person has their own way of seeing things and their own skills, and that's when really amazing things can happen.
I totally agree. And speaking of amazing things, I think it's time to talk about one of the most interesting parts of this research, what it tells us about how flight evolved. People have been fascinated by this for ages.
Definitely. Flight is one of the most remarkable things that happened in the history of life. And pterosaurs, like our friend Pterodactylus, they were the first ones up there, flying millions of years before birds even existed.
It's incredible to imagine these creatures flying around when dinosaurs were walking the earth, figuring out how to fly long before any other animal with a backbone. So how does this new research on Pterodactylus help us understand this amazing evolutionary journey?
Well, one of the big things we talked about was finding those flaplings and how Pterodactylus were precocial, meaning they could fly super early, not like birds, which take a while to grow before they can get off the ground.
Right, those little guys are flying almost right out of the egg, not at all like helpless baby birds in a nest.
Exactly. And that difference in how they develop is really important because it tells us that pterosaurs and birds, even though they both fly, evolved in totally different ways. Their flight strategies, their life cycles, even their bodies, they all show these different evolutionary paths.
So what are some of the main things this research tells us about Pterodactylus and the evolution of flight?
Well, one thing is that because Pterodactylus were precocial, they probably had a more independent life from a very young age. They didn't depend on their parents for food or protection, like baby birds do, so they could spread out more, explore, and maybe even avoid competing with other species.
Like they were born ready to take on the sky.
That's a great way to put it. And this independence might have been a big reason why they were so successful. It let them adapt to all kinds of environments and find new ways to live.
This is all so fascinating, but I have to say, when I think about how flight evolved, I tend to think about the physical stuff, like wings, feathers, and light bones. Does this research say anything about those things?
That's a great question. While this research was more about how they developed and lived, it does connect to what we know about those physical adaptations for flight. Remember those soft tissue impressions we talked about? The webbing between their toes, the way their wings were built. All of that gives us clues about how Pterodactylus flew and how their bodies were perfectly designed for it.
Right. It's like we're getting a peek at how nature designed these amazing creatures.
Exactly. And when we compare those features to other pterosaurs and to birds, we can start to figure out how flight evolved in different groups of animals. It's like a giant puzzle, and each fossil we find adds another piece, showing us more of the whole picture.
And that picture keeps changing and getting bigger as we discover more fossils. And this Pterodactylus research definitely added some big pieces to the puzzle.
Absolutely. It reminds us that science is always changing, always growing as we find new things. And it shows just how powerful human curiosity is and how much we want to understand the world around us, both the past and the present.
It's a really amazing thought that creatures that lived millions of years ago can still teach us so much about ourselves and our planet.
I agree. And as we keep exploring the fossil record, I'm sure we'll find even more amazing things that will change what we thought we knew and spark our imagination.
It's a great time to be a paleontologist and to be someone who loves paleontology. It seems like there's a new discovery all the time that changes what's in the textbooks and pushes the limits of what we thought we knew about life on Earth.
You're right. And this research on Pterodactylus is the perfect example. They took this well-known creature, looked at it in a new way, and found a ton of new information about how it lived, how it evolved, and what its role was in the history of life on Earth.
And that story is still being written. I'm excited to see what we discover next.
Me too. And who knows, maybe one of our listeners will be the one to make the next big discovery.
That would be amazing. So, to everyone listening, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive as much as we have. Remember, there's a whole world of knowledge out there just waiting to be found. So keep asking questions, stay curious, and keep exploring.